In today's game, we are going to discuss game played between Harikishna from India and Magnus Carlsen from Norway, the world champion. This game was played in slave Indian defense, and in this game was played in the time controlled 25 minutes plus 10-second increment in Tata Steel tournament in 2019. We will start with the game. And in this game, you will understand that even the world champions are unable to understand the complexities of Endgame in flip seconds when they have very few seconds on their clock. Even they can blunder, they can make mistakes. So let's start with our game. D4 was played by Harikishna and knight f6 was played by Magnus Carlsen. C4, C6, knight C3 and D5. A structure of the slave defense. In many cases, black may take on this pawn. But in this game, Harikishna was the first to take on d5, c into d5, bishop f4, and this structure resembles with the London system actually. But in London system, there is a pawn on c2 still, which is moved to then c3, and white tries to move this pawn to e4 in future. First he plays this pawn to e3. So knight c6 was played, e3 was played, all standard moves. Bishop f5 still in the opening, queen b3, knight a5, and here there are 451 games in the database, out of which 28% are won by white, 54% games are draw, and 18% games are won by black. Queen a4 check, still in the opening, bishop d7, queen c2, e6, bishop d3, knight c6, queen e2. The reason behind moving this queen to e2 was that black is going to play this move, knight b4, and white does not want to play this move a3 at present in the game. This position or this game includes a lot of positional maneuvering and positional understanding basically, and the best placement of your pieces. And you would see in this game that both of the grandmasters have to do a move, but they do it in 4 or 5 moves. Okay, queen e2 was played, bishop b4, and after this move bishop b4, this is a new territory. This is the 11th move, and in past the moves which are being tried are bishop e7, which generated 38% wins for white and 18% wins for black. The other were draw. And after that, h3 was played in the continuation if this bishop e7 move was played. Rook c8 and knight f3. So this might be the continuation if bishop e7 was played. We go back over to game where bishop b4 was played. Instead of bishop e7, there was another move in the database, and that is rook to c8. We are going to look at that also. Rook c8, knight f3, bishop e7, and rook c1. And this sequence of moves have generated only draws, not wins for any side. So we go back to our main move where bishop b4 was played in the game. After that, knight f3, queen h5. I'm going to flip the board and let you people understand that what is the problem with black's position. The problem with black's position is that this bishop is stuck, which happens usually in slave defense or French defense, as this is type of a structure which resembles to French defense and slave defense. And this bishop, if white plays here a3, then what will you do? Are you going to capture this knight on c3, or are you going to bring this bishop back to e7? After when this position was reached, Magnus Carlsen gave round about 4 to 5 minutes thought, and after that he played the move knight h5. Actually, these pieces have no heir, not even this bishop, whereas white pieces are completely developed. This bishop on d3 is eyeing the h7 b1 diagonal. This bishop is good, this knight is good, this knight is pinned, but after castle this knight will be doing a lot of things like maneuvering from here to here, from a4 to c5. But if you look at the black pieces, they are stuck. So in order to give heir to his pieces, Magnus Carlsen made this move knight h5. He wanted to take this bishop over here. Even he takes this bishop on this f4 square, still white's position is better because white can move his queen to e3, then he can move his knight to e5, and then he can bring his rook to c1, and then he can castle and bring his rook to obviously over this d1 square or e1 square. So let's get with our game where knight h5 was played, bishop g5. This is also an equal move. White does not want to trade this bishop on this square. He wants to maneuver it to here. He wants to trade it over here. And if black makes any type of moves like these, which our weaker players like us move, that immediately countering the threat, then we are going to weaken our king side and the light squares and this pawn. So after that, queen a5 was played. Instead of it, it was better to bring the bishop to f6. But I don't consider this computer line actually. I think the move which was played in the game was better, which was queen a5 by Magnus Carlsen. We will have a look at the move which is computer is suggesting, and that is knight f6. After that, h3, stopping black from coming over here, black knight. Bishop e7 coming back. The reason behind is that I don't like this move knight f6 is that you have to bring over your pieces back to their about less impressive squares. Castle, rook a d1 and knight e8. Now look here, this bishop is stuck. This bishop is stuck if white does not exchange it. This knight is not positioned well. Although it is coming over here to d6, I'm these squares on e4 and c4. I think that does not have the tempo, whereas white has a tempo. This knight, wherever it goes, a5 or b4, it will be hit back by a3 and b4. So I don't like this computer line. Instead of it, I go with queen a5, the Magnus Carlsen moves. After that, castle was played in the game, and h6, hitting this bishop over here. Bishop h4 and g5. It has become very important for black to take this bishop. Here bishop g3 was played by Harikishna, whereas this was a mistake or W's move. It was better to play the move knight d2, but I think he calculated it and he did not like the position arising as a result. For example, after that, bishop into c3, knight b3, threatening queen, and queen comes back to d8. Queen can't save this bishop over here by playing this move, queen to b4, because white will play then a3. So b into c3, g into h4, queen into h5, queen g5, queen f3. And if you see that black although has attacking chances over here, but white is completely protected. But black has these two liabilities on h6 and h4, and his king is still in the center, and this bishop is stuck. So I think the move which was played in the game, bishop g3, was better. After that, knight into e3, f into g3, and g4, immediately asking white that where are you going to place your knight. In the game, Harikishna played the move knight h4. Although this move is okay, but I will go with the computer suggestion here, where the computer plays knight d2, f5, and knight b3, queen c7, a3, bishop e7. And I think this is the better continuation, because these knights are doing something over here, which was maneuvered from here. Whereas, as per the move which was played in the game, knight h4, the knight is stuck over here. And for a very long time in the game, it was stuck over here, and Harikishna had to do a lot of things to make this knight alive. So rook g8 was played because this pawn on g4 was threatened. Rook a c1, now protecting this pawn, protecting this knight. I am going back to a position because I wanted you to tell you that why this knight could not be taken immediately when white did not have the castle. Let's come back here. Yes, here why black could not take this knight over here on c3, because after when b into c3, queen can capture the pawn for free. I'm giving you some time to think. Please pause the video and think over it. that why can't we capture this knight on c3 in this position. Hope after pausing the video you have understood the reason behind it, that if bishop takes the knight over here, after b into c3 and queen into c3, then rook a b1, hitting this pawn over here on b7. If black protects the pawn by playing b6, then rook fc1, lining up on this open and half open file. Queen will have to be moved, queen a3, then bishop b5, hitting this knight over here. And you can see that this diagonal is controlled by the bishop, white bishop, on g5. After rook c8, protecting this knight over here, then the final blow would be knight e5. And black will have to lose a piece over here in this position. So that's why we can't take this knight over here. So we go back to our continuation in the game where rook c1 was played, protecting this knight now, because now this knight could be captured. f5 was played, strengthening this pawn on g4 and taking away all the scares from this knight. On h4, a3, bishop into c3, rook into c3, knight e7 was played. If I give you a time to think over here, kindly pause the video and please have a look at this position and see what the black position had the problems, what type of problems black position have. How can he develop his knight, or how can he develop his bishop on d7 over here? And what to do with this e5 queen? So in order to develop this bishop over here, bishop d7, Magnus Carlsen thought of a maneuver, and that maneuver was knight to e7, knight to c8, and knight to d6. And then it is covering these squares, e4 and c5. And in our games, we should think of these kind of types of maneuvers. We should always be thinking that if we have a passed piece, how to develop it. A basically piece which is not developed properly, and how to develop it. And this is a good example from this position. Knight e7, rook fc1, doubling the rook on c5, rook c8, and queen f2 was played. Instead of it, it was also equal to take the rook on c8 with check, knight into c2. When I was seeing this game, the video of this game, I calculated these moves, but I did not found anything proper. The both of the moves which was played in the game are same. The queen f2 have the equal value, and when you take the rook on c8 with check, it also has the equal value. Knight into c8, queen f2, queen b6, b4. Now this bishop has scope over here, some scope on this diagonal. Queen d6, rook c5, knight e7, and although it seems that white is very much better over here, but queen is protecting a very important diagonal over here. And after that, black king saying that I am going to play might be b6, asking your rook to move back. Then I am going to play this move. Sorry, to bishop c6 or bishop c8 over here and here. Or I have another idea in my mind that I could play the move a6 over here. So we go back to our main game where queen f2 was played, and after that rook into c3, rook into c3, queen b6 and h3. It is a dubious move. It was better to maneuver the pieces for some time long. The computer suggestion, I have analyzed it thoroughly, and I have come to the point that whatever the move, whether it is h3 or the computer suggested move queen c2, both have equal balance. Because after queen c2, king f7, queen f2 was back, pinning this king on f5, rook c8, rook into c8, bishop into c8, queen f4, and queen b3. The game is equal. So we go back to one main move which was played in the game, and that was h3. The reason behind to play this move h3 was, if black takes on h3 and g takes into h3, then this knight has a breathing scare. Now you understand that why this move knight f3 to h4 was a dubious move. Instead of it, it was better to move this knight to d2 and then to b3. h5 was played in the game, strengthening this pawn on g4. King h2, queen d6, queen f4, queen into f4, g into f4, knight c8 and g3. At last, white was able to have a scare for his knight to breathe. Knight d6. We've seen that how Magnus Carlsen maneuvered his knight from e7 to c8 and then to d6. And then now he is controlling these scares on c4 and e4. Knight g2 was played, king d8, taking the scare from the rook of white, c7 scare, to enter into black's territory. Knight e1 was played to make this knight active. Rook g7 was played, controlling this rank. And the reason behind is that Magnus Carlsen had a plan in his mind to keep his king for a while on d8 and bringing his rook to g7, and then he is going to trade one of these pieces. And when one of these pieces, usually the bishop, is traded, then rook can immediately come to c7, challenging this rook on c3. This was the plan which Magnus Carlsen had in mind. So after that, king g2 was played, bringing the king to the center. And bishop b5 was played. As the game is blocked, you could see over here. So instead of bishop, knight is important. Instead of this bishop, this knight on d6 is important. So that's why instead of playing this move, knight to b5. Magnus Carlsen played the move bishop to b5. That bishop into b5. Now I'm going to give you a think over here in this position, that is it possible that is it possible, just a moment, there has some problem with the software. I clicked something wrong actually. So once again we are back into over here, into our game. I'm going to flip the board, as we were studying this position from the black's perspective, from the Magnus Carlsen side. That is it possible to play this move over here, and if bishop takes r, we are going to r, instead of playing this move knight to c2, we could play this move pawn to b4, r, b3, and we say that we are not going to take this bishop on b4, b5. You could take my bishop on d3, and I would be able to develop this knight on d3. Give a think about it, and I will give you the answer. No, it is not possible over here, because if white plays the move like, for example, b6, b3, black would go for p6 over here. And if the king moves, rook moves to anywhere, this bishop is stuck. For example, rook moves to rook c2, then bishop into d3, knight into d3, and rook c7. Now the black pawn structure over here is better instead of this white pawn structure. And after that, knight is coming to e4, and knight has many maneuvers. Knight can come over to e7 to a5 extra. So we can't let black to take this bishop on d3. Instead, we have to take the bishop on b5. So after that, knight into b5 was played. Rook c2, knight was, as rook was threatened on c3. Knight d6, knight d3. Knight c4, hitting this pawn on e3. And white has to protect, so he plays rook e2 and rook c7. Now you understand the maneuver of Magnus Carlsen, that what he did. That my king is in the way. I have a plan in my mind. I could exchange this bishop on d5, which will allow to develop my knight on d6, and then my rook will be able on g7 to move to c7 square and controlling this open file. These types of plans we should have in our mind when we are doing calculations, that how can we move our pieces placements better. So here h into g4 was played. H into g4, king f1, bringing the king to this queen side. King e7 was played, bringing this king better to f6 or to d6. But the king has a prospectus over here, because he could move there like that. So after that, king e1 was played, knight d6 was played, bringing the knight to most valuable square, and that was e4. After that, king d1 was played, knight e4, and rook g2, protecting the pawn on g3. Now in this position, black has advantage, and these types of positions where computer says that you have minus 2.5 and minus 3.0, but on the board, these positions are very complicated ones. So after that, king d6 was played, bringing the king over here on the queen side. Knight f2, challenging this knight over here on e4. Rook h7. Now you please pause the video and think that, can we take this knight over here? Is it possible that we could take this knight over here on e4? So I think you have paused the video and gave a thought to it. We can't take immediately the knight on e4. The reason behind is that if we take it after d into e4, a4, rook h1 check, and king c2, and a5. The problem is that this king has a square or from here. That black's king is very active and black's rook is very active. Instead of this rook on g2, which is just babysitting this pawn on g3, and this king over here. So we could not take this knight over here. So instead, Harikishna played the move king to e2, king c6, king d3. As black king was moving over here, so white moved his king to d3 to counter the black king. King b5 and b3 was played, and now black's position is very good, but on the board, and in a rapid match of 25 minutes 10 seconds, it can swing to any side. But if it was a classical match, then I think Magnus Carlsen would have won this game. But this game ended in a draw because Magnus lost the initiative. Obviously, he was just on 20 seconds or 30 seconds on his time. a5 was played, threatening to play a4. Knight into e4. Now it was taken because the king is now on d3 instead of d1. d into 4 check, king c3, king c6. Magnus Carlsen did not wanted to give white the tempo. Black would have played the move like this, rook to h1. But then white was going to move this pawn a4 by giving the tempo, and king would have to move, and king would move to king c6, and then white was going to move this pawn. Magnus Carlsen did not want to give white the tempo, Harikishna the tempo, so he moved the king himself first, king to c6. After a4, rook h1, b4, rook e1, and that was a mistake by Magnus Carlsen. Instead of it was better to play the move king d5 first. Then rook e2, a into b4 check, king into b4, and rook g1, now hitting this pawn on g3. So we come back to our game, where after b4, rook e1 was played. Sorry, rook c2 was played, king d6, king d2, rook g1, and b into a5, and that was a blunder. And here, black is completely winning. There is no way that he can lose the game, black, Magnus Carlsen. But this is what happens when you are on seconds on your clock. And here, Magnus Carlsen was around about 30 seconds, or 25 to 30 seconds on his clock. And Harikishna might have 1 minute or something. And Magnus Carlsen was unable to use this blunder into his favor to win this game. Instead, he played the move rook g2 check, king d1, rook into g3, rook c3, protecting this pawn over here. As the rook undines are very complicated ones, and this is one of them. Rook f3 was played, and that was another mistake. It was better to give the check first, after king e2, then g3, and then rook c8, and then rook a1. After that, you are going to move this pawn over here. If the rook comes over here first, our king moves over here, our rook comes over here, rook to g1, sorry, g8, then you can immediately take these two pawns. Comes back, then this rook comes back and give the check on g2 and exchange this rook over here. And then black would have this passed pawn. So after rook f3, still black is winning. King e2, g3, rook c8, rook f2 check, king e1, rook a2. Saying that I am going to move this pawn and I am going to take these both pawns. King f1 was played, protecting the square, g8. Rook a3 was played. Instead of it was better to immediately take this rook into a4. If king g2, then rook into a5. After king into g3, then rook a2, taking this rank from the white king. And after that, black can move this pawn forward. And king have to maneuver a lot, but he can't go to this rank, white king. And black is completely winning in this position. Rook b8, Harikishna also did another mistake. Here, rook into c3 was e3 was played by Magnus Carlsen, and that was a blunder, which made the game equal. Instead of it, it was better to give the check. Rook d8 check first, then king c7, rook e8, then rook into e3. After rook b8, rook into e3 was played, and instead of it, it was better to take the pawn on a4. After white moves his king to g2 to take this pawn on g3, rook into a5, taking another pawn. King into g3, taking the pawn on g3, and b5. This pawn is protected by the rook, and king can come to protect this pawn. So after rook into e3, rook into b7 was played, rook a3, and now the game become equal. Here the last try was rook d3, it was better, still the game is equal. a6, rook into d4, a5, rook d5, king g2, rook into a5, and white is going to take this pawn, and black is going to take this pawn, and this game can be foldable. So after rook a3, rook b4 was played, which was a blunder actually by white. Once again, now the black is winning. Instead of here, it was better to play the move king g2. After the move rook b4, e3 was played, rook b2, and king d5. It was a mistake by black. Instead of it, it was better to play the move rook d3, hitting this pawn and hitting this pawn over here by playing this move to d3 and then hitting this pawn over here like this. a6 was going to be played, rook d2, challenging this rook on b2, rook b6 check, king e7, d5, e2 check, king e1, and g2. Rook into e6 check, king f7, king into rook and queen. And black wins the game. Whereas after king d5, king g2 was played and rook into a4, and that was the blunder. Instead of it, black should have gone for king e4, immediately centralizing the game. After king into g3, rook a1, taking hold of this rank. After a6, rook g1 check first, then rook c1. These pawns can be stopped. a5, rook c7. Now you see that these pawns can be stopped. After rook g1, rook g7 check, king h2, and rook a7. And black is completely winning over here there because white can't hold these pawns, and his king is in the corner. So after rook into a4, the game becomes equal, and the remaining game does not need any further comments because at one stage they agreed to a draw. King into g3, king e4, rook b6, rook a1, rook into e6 check, king d3, a6, e2, a7, rook into a7, king f2, and rook h7, rook e3 check, king into d4, rook into e2, rook h2 check, king e1, rook into e2, king into e2. And this is a book draw. The people who don't understand that why it is a book draw, I'm going to give you an example exercise over here. After king e4, king f1, the standard move is over here to take the opposition, because when the black king will take this pawn, he will move his king then to f2. I'm going to do it on the board. This is for the beginners actually. King into f1, king into f4, and king f2. Now this is the opposition. If, for example, black moves over here, then king will move over here, not giving the way. If black moves this pawn, white moves his king to f2. King will have to move back, whether he will move back to f5 and then king to f3, and it is a dead draw position. So this is the end of today's video. If you like it, kindly subscribe the channel and hit the bell icon button. Thank you very much.